Here's John 20, verse 1. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. That's a little note we'll talk about. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. This is the word of the Lord. So this morning, I would like us to recognize the immediacy in which we transition from Jesus being put into the tomb in John 19 to the events we just read here in John 20. There's a rather quick turnaround here. So John 19, it ended with Jesus' death upon the cross. He sipped the vinegar wine that they gave him, declared, "It is finished," gave up his spirit, and he died. To check if Jesus was alive, a soldier then pierced his side, and blood and water came out, is what Scripture says. And that only happens to bodies that are well past living. The heart has stopped beating, and so the literal makeup of what's in our blood begins to separate. And that's what came out of Jesus. At that point, boldly, two prominent Jewish leaders came forward to ask for the body of Jesus. I'm not sure if you knew this, but usually the bodies of those who have been crucified, they are thrown into a common pit and burned. They're not given their own individual graves, their own individual tombs. Usually they just gathered all these bodies and put them in one spot and got rid of them. So Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, they do a rather incredible thing here at the end of John 19. They risked their social standing amongst the Israelites to make sure Jesus' body could be honored. Pilate says yes to these two, and they take care of Jesus' body. But that phrase itself, they take care of Jesus' body, consider what they had to do. Put him in the tomb. Good job, Mason. You are on point. It's that extra sugar in that donut. It's amazing. And everyone else, consider just how mortal Jesus' body would have seemed to Joseph and Nicodemus. Jesus had been flogged, so his back and his sides and almost wherever else would have been shredded, distorted, gruesomely. A crown of thorns had been placed forced upon his head. Consider what that would have done to his face. Nails had been driven through his hands and his feet, and the spear had pierced his side. All of this is what Joseph and Nicodemus would have looked upon, touched, as they wrapped Jesus' body. It must not have been a very pleasant experience for the two of them. The two men then used 75 pounds of oil and perfume and spices in preparing Jesus' body as well. The practical use of these oils and perfumes was to cover up the current and eventual smell of Jesus' decaying body. The amount is astonishing as well, though. 75 pounds is a royal amount, fit for a true king. And that's how we are to see the end of John 19. Joseph and Nicodemus, and the way they can, with the time that they have, and in the way that no one else came forward to do. They bury Jesus as a king. As John 20 opens, that should all be right there in our hearts and in our minds. Right there with Mary. Mary Magdalene, arriving in the dark of the morning, arriving to the tomb of her buried, dead king and teacher. Jesus' very dead body, wrapped in cloth, anointed with oil and perfume, was supposed to be laying unmoving behind the stone. She arrives as a woman who had been forever changed by Jesus. John talks about her earlier in his gospel. Jesus healed her, restored her, gave her new purpose. She became a faithful follower and a faithful caretaker of Jesus. This is how Mary arrives. She arrives to grieve amidst the shadow of death. It is this shadow of death that covers all of what's happening here at the tomb. Except when Mary arrives to the tomb, it's open. We read of the rush of fear, the rush of anxiety, which compels her to rush back to the disciples. She tells them what she has seen, and it is Peter and John who run themselves. They rush to go see the urgency here. They go to see for themselves. Why is it particularly that John includes the fact that he arrived first before Peter? I don't know if that's just some sort of little dig there. Probably not. Just a little joke. It's just forever interesting. We can assume it's because of the reality that John was a young man and Peter was an older man, and one gets slower as they get older, I hear. It's just, it's in there though. Well, these two disciples, they give us the next look at the empty tomb. Peter, with his personality, it's so appropriate. He's the one that just barrels right into the tomb. He goes inside first and sees the cloth and linen separated. This detail is important. It serves as evidence against Jesus' body being stolen. Right? Mary came to them saying Jesus was taken. He's taken. Remember again, Jesus' body was gruesomely beat when he was laid to rest in the tomb. to remove the linen and cloth and leave it behind would be kind of the opposite of sense in taking Jesus' body. You would want the whole package. Please don't unwrap that. After Peter goes in, the other disciple, John, goes in. He stands in this space which no longer contains the person of Jesus Christ. And then our scripture passage simply says, he believes. There's a quick note afterward that John and the other disciples, they really don't fully understand everything that has happened in this immediate moment, and yet belief is accredited to John as he stands in that empty tomb. The shadow of death has been lifted. There is a light of hope and goodness in his heart. We have this fascinating reality of John recognizing in his heart what his mind can't fully comprehend yet. This is faith. Beneath the surface of what the eye can see, the truth of Jesus works a significance that demands faith. John does not yet know the theological, the scriptural supports for this moment here in the tomb, but his heart believes. Imagine standing there with Peter, with John. Imagine Mary just right there outside. We are invited into this space on this Easter day to respond, to believe what John miraculously recognizes in his heart of hearts. The tomb is empty. There lay the cloth. There lays the linen. Do you believe in your heart that Jesus is no longer dead, but he has risen and is alive? We're really called to pause. Consider the quietness that would be there in that tomb. That early morning kind of darkness. The coolness probably in that place. Do you believe that Jesus is alive? That Jesus has changed everything? That he's changed reality itself because of the evidence of this empty tomb. He has risen from the dead. Do you believe that God has fulfilled his promise that he gave his children generation after generation before? I will be your God, and you will be my people. Do you believe? Because if you do, you are invited to respond. You're compelled to respond. Because Jesus is alive, this means that all things he has said, all things he has done, all things that he's promised from God the Father, well, they must be true. He has the power. You're invited to believe and trust in this. Everything that Jesus has said and done, you're invited to trust in it with all your life. You're invited in this empty tomb to actually find relief here from your burdens. You're invited to find relief here from your misery. You're invited to lay your anxieties, your worries, your hopes, your dreams. We're very complicated people, aren't we? You're invited to lay all of that complexity, all of who you are, the fullness of your very life in this space. And you can do so with true hope, knowing that Jesus Christ actually has the power to overcome that, to give you something beyond what you can't do, what you can't control. We are invited to this space, this empty tomb, to give all of us, ourselves, to Jesus Christ. There's obviously more in John chapter 20, this beautiful interaction between Mary Magdalene and Jesus, and then onwards with Jesus and the disciples. For us today, we've had this series so far where we reflected, starting back in John chapter 9, these things that Jesus did and taught and proclaimed. All these opportunities for us to believe, to have hope. And yet it's in his non-presence, if you will, in this empty tomb, in his death, that we are compelled fully to believe and trust that Jesus is true, that he's true to his word, that we can trust it, that we can give everything of ourselves to it, and that we can actually go out into the community around us, to all those other complex people with their complex lives, and say that there's something more that they can hope in. So we're going to stay at the empty tomb here. We're going to think about it, pray about it. When we go from our separate spaces and we have our Easter lunches and dinners and naps and whatever it is that we're going to do, I invite you to remember what this empty tomb means and to believe.
Go in peace. We'll see you next week.